All right, welcome everyone. Thank you for joining us in this discussion of growth beyond borders, empowering expansion. Great to have all of you guys here. Just wanted to make sure that everybody is settling in nicely before we head right into our discussion. We have quite a number of people from different backgrounds with us this afternoon from Singapore, but I'm sure there are people dialing in from everywhere around the world. And hopefully everybody's interested in really learning about our topic for this afternoon, which is scaling and expanding into Southeast Asia. Before we move forward with the discussion, just want to remind everybody that we have the chat function in Livestorm, which you can see in the lower right corner of your screen, which you can click on and leave questions there throughout our discussion, and we'll get to them in the Q&A portion. So very quickly, as just a quick overview of our program today, we'll be going over some prepared questions on the topic and then opening the floor for Q&A for you guys. We want to be as helpful as possible for you as we go along with this discussion. And I'll be moderating this discussion for this afternoon. I'm Paolo Joaquino, Senior Content Strategist at Insignia Ventures Partners, Southeast Asia-based venture capital firm with a little over 800 million AUM and over 80 plus companies, including one of the companies that have joined us for this panel this afternoon. So, right, just checking how many people are online and coming in. Right, welcome to those who just joined. Thank you for joining us in Growth Beyond Borders. I think I'm gonna give maybe 2 minutes just to make sure there are more people online before don't want to have people miss out on anything. In the meantime, for those who just came in, do check out the chat function in the lower right corner of your screen. Where you can leave questions, maybe even introduce yourselves to each other. Who knows, you might find some valuable connections in this cohort of attendees for this webinar. Right, maybe 4:04. We'll start with some introductions from our panel. All right, those who just came in, welcome once again to our Growth Beyond Borders webinar. Hope you guys have had your bathroom breaks and all that, because we're going to be having quite a discussion this afternoon. Maybe those who are in, maybe you guys can, yeah, thanks, Top, for introducing yourself. Those who are in, maybe you can share what country you're from, your company, why you're interested in this topic, and then maybe if you already had a question coming in, you can already start to leave it so that we can put it on the top of the list when you get into Q&A. All right, so we have with us on this panel really leaders, executives, seasoned professionals who have made it, their mission and their work in the various organizations that they're in to really help businesses expand in various aspects, from talent to financial management. So really honored to have 3 of them here with us on this panel. So I'll have them introduce themselves very briefly and also hype you guys up for the discussion afterwards. So first off, I wanted to bring on, welcome Karen Nung, who is the expansion leader for Deel in ASEAN, India, and North Asia as well. Welcome, Karen, and thanks for joining us this afternoon. Maybe a quick introduction and also briefly, what are the exciting opportunities that you're seeing from where you are when it comes to business expansion and growth in Southeast Asia?
Thank you, Paulo. Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for your time today. My name is Karen. I'm dialing in from Singapore. So I head the region for Deel. Deel, we're a global HR company, so we help companies growth beyond borders. So that's a topic really close to us. I'm particularly excited because we've ourselves as a company, we've actually launched in Indonesia and in the next couple of weeks in Malaysia itself. So really seeing Southeast Asia shine for us. So really happy to be sharing maybe what I see within our customer base, but also what I see on a personal level. Thank you.
Yeah, definitely Deel is a great example of just the world becoming more interested in Southeast Asia. So yeah, great news on the expansion there. And second in our panel is Thomas Jeng, the Singapore GM for Aspire. So really great to have somebody from Aspire, portfolio company of Insignia Ventures, on as well on this panel. So welcome, Thomas. Yeah, quick introduction and what are you excited about when it comes to business expansion in Southeast Asia?
For sure. Thanks for having me and great to be here as well. For those of you not familiar, Aspire is a fintech based in Singapore. We are increasingly trying to go global with our business accounts, multi-currency services, and our corporate cards products. We're also rolling out a suite of APIs in the very near future. For myself, I oversee the commercial operations in Singapore overall, so leading the business here. One very exciting development, or really a series of them that we've seen over the past few years, is that ASEAN businesses or Southeast Asian businesses are increasingly going global. Historically, Southeast Asia was more of a commodities-driven economy. People were just sort of exporting various agricultural goods, tin, whatever commodities that were in the global market. We do see increasingly, especially in a more digital age, companies in the region exporting services, software, more sophisticated offerings overall, and we're very happy to be a part of that.
Yeah, so it's both ways. You have folks like Deel from the rest of the globe coming into South Asia, and then you have, businesses like Aspire from Southeast Asia, targeting the world. So that's great for the region. And finally, last but not least on our panel, we have Ollie Riches, who is senior managing director at Michael Page, and really an experienced HR leader. So really excited to have him on this panel. Ollie, quick intro, and what are you excited about in Southeast Asia?
Yeah, thanks, Paolo, and good afternoon to everybody. So quick introduction. Michael Page, for those not aware, is a British public listed executive recruitment company. Been operating about 45 years, so one of the larger players globally. I started my career in London and then moved to mainland China in 2006 to set up our China operations, and then on to Jakarta in 2013 to do a similar thing across Southeast Asia, starting with Indonesia and then building our operations across 6 Southeast Asia countries, Singapore, where I'm based now, very much the head office for us across Asia Pacific. So I spent the last 16, 17 years in this region, very much promoting the opportunities in this region to companies looking to either expand in various parts of it or accelerate their growth into various markets across the region. Look, reason to be excited. Southeast Asia, I still think, is quite early in its journey, but PE, VC firms are more and more coming to us saying that we have to have bigger portfolios in Southeast Asia. We have multinational companies telling us it's a must-have rather than a nice-to-have, and that has shifted. I think partly because of some of the dynamics happening in North Asia with China and some of the challenges there. That Southeast Asia is very well positioned to take advantage of that. And it's a very compelling story, but it just needs more communication, I think, and the people on this panel certainly are part of that ecosystem as well. So very happy to expand on any parts of that as we go through the next hour or so.
Yeah, thanks, Ollie. Really great to have some experienced storytellers of Southeast Asia's, growth here in our discussion this afternoon. So we once again, for those who just came in, we have leaders from Deel, Aspire, Michael Page joining with us to talk about expansion, especially into Southeast Asia, which is a very expansive topic in itself. We could spend an entire I remember we joked off session like an entire Netflix series just talking about just talking about this topic. But I think in particular there are some markets that are very interesting, and there are also some challenges that need to be overcome first before really talking about expansion. So I wanted to ask all our panelists today, what are some of the top challenges this has come to you to solve when entering Southeast Asia from your field of expertise? We have a quite diverse field here. And yeah, maybe you can pinpoint some of those before we head into the business hacks section of our discussion. So Karen, you can go ahead and go first.
Sure. I guess the one word that always come up for us is compliance, right? So doing business in Singapore is not the same as doing business in Indonesia or Malaysia or Vietnam or Philippines, right? And so are the labor laws, right? So navigating those labor laws, right? So when you hire someone in Singapore, we talk about CPF, we talk quite straightforward, right? But when you talk about hiring someone in Vietnam, there are a series of different statutory funds, right, that come into place. As such, so if you look at the Deel website, we actually have quite a bit of resources that we've put in place to help business entrepreneurs, to help like the HR community to get acquainted, and even for you as an employee, right? So if you're joining us today as a remote worker that you've been working or you're considering, right, to work for, let's say you're based somewhere else, you're considering to work for a company based in the US, for example, what you should be asking for in terms of, like how do you calculate your statutory funds and also in terms of taxes, right? So yeah, I would say for us, it's compliance.
For Thomas, what challenges do you see?
Yeah, so I echo what Karen said about compliance. I think that is a significant issue that most of our clients and partners deal with on a regular basis. To the word compliance, I would add fragmentation. So Southeast Asia is a very diverse region. As Karen mentioned, laws in one place are not the same as any other. And that affects financial services as well. Perhaps in some ways, even before you add people, or actually maybe after you add people, given what Deel can do, you do want to set up entities in the region. You do want to set up bank accounts in the region so you can receive funding, you can receive revenue, you can pay your people, and so that you can have your people spend money as well in order to grow the business in the region, which presumably you're trying to do, right? Even if you're using it as a sort of operational hub or engineering hub, as is often the case, you still need to pay your people. So that actually adds a whole layer of difficulty given how different and in some cases how stringent banking regulations can be. Even in a place like Singapore, which is one of the most business-friendly environments in the world, it can take up to 2 to 3 months, sometimes even 4 to 6 months for companies with foreign directors to create a bank account. And so that leads to a lot of challenges for people that are trying to get operational. I actually faced this personally when I was trying to set up a business in the region. Creating a corporate entity in Singapore, no problem, but creating a bank account took us like 2 to 3 months, which actually led to the delay of a key project that we were trying to drive. And so this is a challenge I know firsthand. Even moving beyond that, once you have the bank account set up and you have teams all throughout the region, which is very common, you then have to figure out how to get all of them on the same page, make sure they're working with a similar budgets, and there's transparency across everything, and certainly accountability and control. And so because you likely have people scattered throughout so many different places, that becomes an even greater level of difficulty as well.
Yeah, definitely can't underestimate the fragmentation of Southeast Asia. For Ollie, compliance 343 for this one, or are there other challenges that you've seen in your experience?
Yeah, I know we're here to promote Southeast Asia, but there clearly are challenges, and I could write a book on how many. But I thought China was tricky, but Southeast Asia, as Thomas has alluded to, every country has its own culture, business-wise as well as people-wise. So navigating that it does take patience, and as Karen alluded to as well, the regulatory areas. I've spent a lot of time with Ministry of Manpowers who on one side are telling you we want to grow the country and we want to be competitive. At the same time, they're putting all kinds of restrictions in place, particularly around talent. Some of that is protectionism to enable the local population to develop through and localization. Nothing wrong with that. But at the same time, if you're investing in a country which you don't really know, you really want trust and communication so you can make the right decisions to ensure your investment pays off. And that's where the challenge can lie. And visa restrictions and all these kind of things are very much part of that. So for me, it really comes down to, I suppose, to the risk appetite a company has. How determined are they to come into market? How long are they looking to be in market? It is not a short-term option. You do need to be in for the long term. And that's regulatory, but also in terms of the people you get to connect with, and it's very relationship led across Southeast Asia. That is a consistent factor. A lot of it's about who you know as much as what you know, to enable business to sort of to grow. We always hear about talent shortage. I think that's actually a bit of a myth. There is talent, but again, it's thinking creatively. It's not going after exactly the same people everyone else is going after, and having a very clear sort of strategy on what your point of differentiation is, which I think we may be coming on to later, Paolo, in terms of some of your questions. But look, there's many challenges, but there's also many companies who have set up across Southeast Asia very successfully. So there are case studies there which can be looked at across pretty much all industries. There's also companies who maybe haven't got it right, and they can also be quite useful to look at in terms of not, and sometimes hiring from those companies can help, because if someone's made that mistake once, they're unlikely to make it as mistake again. So back to my point about being a little bit creative in your thinking when you are looking at your hiring strategy, which can look confusing and disjointed, as Thomas says, when you're trying to go around various parts of the Southeast Asia region.
Yeah, and that's why we're all here this afternoon, to actually learn from each other, and try to circumnavigate those challenges and reduce the risks of those uncertainties expanding into the region. And just to pick up on your point on the talent shortage myth, and really thinking creatively about bringing in talent, attracting talent when expanding into the region. Ollie, maybe you can dive a little bit deeper into that and maybe share some examples, or of thinking creatively when it comes to attracting talent, and then obviously retaining them as well.
Yeah, I mean, the first answer is clearly you should use the right provider, but we're not here to sell Michael Page so blatantly. Things like returnees, looking at your sort of, if you're coming with investment from overseas, how can you tap into, for example, Indonesians based in the US or based in Europe? It's never been a better time to come back career-wise, because there are probably better opportunities back at home than there are overseas at the moment. It's just knowing what those opportunities are, and that's where the downfall comes. It's a lack of knowledge, I suppose, about what, if I do go home, what does that mean? And often people have a perception of what home was like, and that has shifted, and the dynamics in all of these economies have shifted. So the opportunities are there, and most companies we talk to, their preference is somebody from country who has some international experience, and I'm talking more your leadership, mid-management and above level. So that's one thing which certainly is tapping into sort of overseas networks. The other thing which we're seeing more and more now is companies looking at inclusivity as part of their employee value proposition. So D&I has been on the agenda for a while. Inclusivity as a whole. I mean, even in Singapore alone, which is, as Karen said, it has a perception of being easier. I'm not sure it always is. That there's 100,000 professionals with disability in Singapore alone, all looking for roles, all looking for opportunities across various different skill sets, but are never really on the radar, for an example. And it's not a blame thing. It's just that's an opportunity, because that can also then lead to culture and other things, which we know Gen Z millennials are very keen on purpose-driven businesses, particularly startups and companies expanding early. There's an opportunity there to really put your brand ahead of this, but then you need to back it up with your hiring strategy. They're not just hiring the same demographic. You have to look broader. So that inclusivity piece is easy to say in a boardroom and then be pushed down the agenda, but from a hiring perspective, it's very compelling. I think COVID and everything else which went with it has enabled hybrid working much more easily across the region as a whole, which has opened up different talent pools which maybe weren't on the radar before, should have been, but weren't, and now are becoming more so. So there's just two ideas. There's obviously others as well, but referral campaigns and various other bits and pieces. But they would be two that we're seeing successfully implemented by companies, and not necessarily the larger MNCs.
Yeah, really expanding your radar to capture people that you may not have been looking at before. I think really important. And yeah, I've had a lot of different portfolio companies as well that told us that because of the pandemic, they've actually been able to get more engineering talent, get exposed to more engineering talent, especially because of the new remote work arrangement. Which leads me into my next question for Thomas. As with Aspire being a multinational startup, venture-backed startup, now scale up. How has that experience been of, also scaling that remote management of a team that is spread out across different geographies and, hiring really fast as well?
Yeah, I think it's a really interesting question, and I would not say that we have solved it by any stretch of the imagination. Our strategy so far has been a little bit multidimensional. On the one hand, we try to ensure that client-facing teams and market-facing teams are in the market with the clients as much as possible. On the other hand, for operational or engineering teams, we do try to balance cost effectiveness as well as availability of talent. And so, in order to do that, we've created clusters throughout the region, ops in Malaysia and Indonesia, and engineering in Vietnam as well as India. And so, in all of these cases, we do try to have senior leaders visit. We try to fly some of the managerial talent around the region as well to make sure that they're staying in touch with the rest of the organization. For client-facing teams, whenever we do have remote teams, we do try to get them together and do whatever we can through swag, through events, through activities, through visits by senior leadership to help them feel like they are part of the organization as a whole.
Right. Yeah, I really like that idea of clustering. I guess it's really important to know what kind of talent you're looking for in different geographies, and those reasons can really vary. I think a lot of people set up engineering teams in specific markets as well, or ops teams, depending on the location and all of that. And so once you do find that talent, once you've identified, a market for, to tap into these talent pools, how do what can you do to reduce the admin burden? And I know, Karen, you touched on this a little bit earlier. Maybe you can go in a little bit deeper, especially with regards to, I think, Singapore and Indonesia, as these are really, markets of interest in the region thus far.
Yeah, so in Singapore, we started here. I think we are technically an American holdco at the very top, but the main operations we have are in Singapore, and so we do hire directly. We do bill directly through our entity in Singapore. For Aspire in Indonesia as well, this has been a strategic market for us, and that was also the case in Vietnam, where we actually
Is
markets like India, where we actually in markets like India where we don't have commercial interest directly, we actually have used EOR providers. So we employ our full team in India via an employment or employer of record organization and pay them out that way.
Yeah, great learnings for our audience here tonight, this afternoon rather, from our from Aspire. Karen, anything to add in terms of what businesses can look out for and make sure not to miss when it comes to setting those entities up as Thomas has illustrated?
Sure. I think there's one thing, maybe to go back to what Oliver was saying earlier. I think what we see is there's a talent shortage, right? So that's a fact, right? So I think these days so there is, of course, right? So the will to actually grow beyond borders. So which means, okay, I want to set up an office in Malaysia. I have a business needs to set up, right, in Indonesia. But ultimately today, when you look at the talent landscape, is you can't find sometimes the talent onshore, right? Be it for cost or even skill set, right? So as a business owner, you have to diversify you. So you need to open up, right? And that's what we've seen, right? So that now there's a lot of hires that actually are being hired outside of Singapore, outside of their home country, because they can't find the talent, right? So that's one. I would say then once they find the talent, to answer your question, would be maybe to define their work status, right? So today, as we know, we always talk about full-time employment, right? I'm a full-time employee with the company. I get paid my CPF and that's it, right? I have 20 days of annual leave and that's it. I think today the workforce has changed, right? Especially when it comes to tech, where a lot of workers are willing to work on a consultant basis, right? So that for you as a founder, right, if you are operating a business, could be actually a good middle ground, right? So one is overcoming, right, so the fact that you need to go and open an entity just to get a few people on board, right? And as Thomas was saying, right, actually opening the entity could be easy, but then getting a bank account is a different story, right? And getting as well, someone to manage that office, right? So all of those today you need to consider. And that's why I guess one of our core service, right? The employment of record actually came about, and is very popular today amongst the companies, right? So I think in terms of admin, absolutely right. So, and when it comes to people as well, you need to make sure, again, to go back to compliance, right? Making sure they have the right employment contract, be it a consultancy agreement, that they have the right infrastructure to work from, right? Even if you're working from home, right? How do you disperse equipment, right? Do they have the like, I give you an example, right? So our team in Hong Kong, as you know, Hong Kong is, like a little bit, so people actually prefer to go to the office, right? So if you are hiring people in Hong Kong, you should know about these nuances, right? That actually, yeah, it's good to be flexible, but it's also good to have a hybrid model, right? Depending on the market that you do.
Yeah, I think again, really hammering down that point of Ollie's earlier about really being creative. Like you don't have to stick to one arrangement necessarily, but depending on the function, really juggle between consultants and then employee of record and all of that.
And if
And
I may
so
add as well,
yeah,
Paolo, I guess it's the benefits, right? I think maybe Ollie can chime in. I think benefits today compared to yesterday is actually different, right? And there's no one size fit all. Like I always say this, like in the couple of years ago, right? The typical benefit that an employee or an employer would give is health insurance, right? That's kind of nice to have. It's a for some companies nice to have. For some, it's a must. But today the benefits change, right? Especially after COVID, I think, right? A lot of people are looking for more flexibility and other type of benefits, right? Not your usual just the health insurance.
yeah, Ollie, did you want to add onto the benefits discussion? I think that's an interesting point.
Yeah, I agree, and this is an opportunity for employers as well. Back to my creative thinking view, and it's not as easy as it sounds. Don't get me wrong, but it also depends on the markets. And the Philippines, for example, healthcare is a huge part of the benefits package, and people will not move jobs unless the healthcare at least matches or improves. But in some other markets, people are very happy to take a cash allowance and make their own decision on where they want to spend it, whether it's on healthcare, whether it's on transport, whatever it might be. And this goes back again that. Interestingly, in the Philippines, when Bangkok, Manila, Jakarta, we have 80% of our people coming back to the office every day, and they're probably the most congested cities anywhere in the world. In Singapore, it's 35%, which is the easiest city to get to the office in. So Karen's absolutely right. You have to know the local nuances to then create a strategy which is relevant to that particular market. I also don't think there's necessarily you have to follow everybody else on this as well, because the surveys we do, flexibility is pretty high up in terms of what candidates are looking for. Number one is always career progression, very closely followed by salary. What on the other side of it, companies are now doing, we're seeing quite rightly, is with the market uncertainties and conditions going on, that drive for profit and cost management is clearly essential. So putting more emphasis on the incentive side of the package rather than the guaranteed basic soon enables you to sort of see who has the mindset that is based around growth and origination rather than just another job. And in Indonesia is quite interesting, with the unicorns dominated the talent landscape for a few years, and it was very much partly be part of the national pride of building a unicorn. And look, we rode that wave as well. We hired significantly into those companies across tech, commercial, across the back office. That has really changed now. So if you're a tech firm right now looking to hire in Indonesia, it's actually a candidate market. It's very much a client market. So there's a lot of candidates where that dream hasn't quite materialized who are clearly on the market again. And some of these unicorns are still downsizing. So if you were hiring in Indonesia 2 years ago, it was very scarce and people were able to ask for 40, 50% increases on salary. And often they were paid that, which is partly why these companies are having to re-engineer or reverse the whole policy. So it's an interesting world at the moment, because if in Indonesia, if I'm a tech startup right now, perfect time to go and hire Indonesia, because you've got the talent pool. Yes, there's elections and there's other things coming on, but we know with Indonesia, invariably there's a stability which carries through. You've got to be a little bit brave with your shareholders to explain to them that, we're going to get going now. Don't wait. If you wait for after the election, everybody will then be aligning again, and then the talent comes scarce again. So you do need to sort of judge each market on its merits. Philippines, another one. A lot of Filipinos overseas, and it's the biggest industry in the Philippines, is actually, as we know, repatriation of money back into the Philippines. The perception is those people don't want to come home, and I alluded to this earlier. Not true. they are very interested in coming back, particularly to startups and being part of that growth. So that's that's what we're seeing. But on the benefit side, incentivized packages are becoming the norm rather than the outlier, and that's across not just sales and marketing. That's across all disciplines, linked to the growth and success of the company. People are wanting loyalty these days. That works now because people, for the first time in some of these markets, have seen colleagues being made redundant, which they'd never seen before, and as a result, that sort of risk appetite is a little bit less. So they are looking for longer term stability and an opportunity to build a career. So that plays all to the employer's benefit. Trust me, 2 years ago, I would have told you it's chaos. And it was whoever had the biggest pockets won, or who was ever most decisive won, and the unicorns dominated that.
Yeah, I think it's pretty clear and also interesting that you talked about how just there's so much opportunity in terms of, talent available to access thanks to a lot of different factors that we've covered so far. But at the same time, I think in this market, a lot of startups are also thinking about costs and spending and all of these other constraints, right? How much should I spend on benefits, vis-a-vis the pay, how many people should I hire in this market, so on and so forth. So I wanted to direct this question to Karen and Ollie. How then do you try to upskill or equip, especially a lean HR team working at a tech company, venture-backed tech company, especially to set the right enough kind of like infrastructure and policies, for example, to be able to grow teams in various markets that we've discussed so far. Karen?
Sure. I think when it comes to HR, like especially in hypergrowth startups, right? It's kind of nice to have, right? Maybe I can ask that to Thomas, right? When did Aspire get an HR person on board, right? I feel that when I talk to you, it's like, yeah, it's nice to have, right? So and I had this discussion with actually a group of a very successful startup in the region. They're like, we are now at around 150 of us. Do you think it's the right time to get someone in HR, right? I was like, oh, wow. Yesterday, right? Or the day before yesterday, that should have happened. So it's kind of nice to have, but at the same time, it's a must, right? Actually, it's a must. It's not an accessory anymore, especially when you're looking at hybrid teams, remote teams, right? You need someone to actually, right? Someone in department, right? To actually contain all of this. So part of it could be outsourced, I agree, right? So for example, right, the whole contracting, the whole hiring, if you don't have an entity, so on and so forth, absolutely, right? But again, to go back to what I said earlier, it's still about people, right? So I think you definitely investing, right, into one.
Did we lose Karen? Yeah, maybe Thomas, you can step in and maybe share a little bit of what Karen was alluding to with regards to bringing in HR, and at what point in Aspire's journey that kind of
Yeah, so I've been around Aspire for about 18 months now. We definitely had an HR function by the time I joined. From what I understand, we, however, kind of did neglect it relatively early on in the company's life cycle. Over the past 18 months, I have seen a significant increase in the consistency of our organization and the way that we operate as we've added more HR resources and have empowered HR in some ways to be more of a strategic leader. When I first joined Aspire, one of the first things I did was actually create a career progression approach or career progression ladder for the commercial teams that I led. And that was quite important for ensuring that people felt like they had a stake in progression and in the success of the organization, because as they proved themselves, they would be able to advance their careers as well. And that's with even relatively small teams. HR has now taken the lead to expand that sort of initiative throughout the rest of the organization. They've been a key thought partner for the commercial leadership in making sure that we do have something in place for people, which has helped to improve retention, improve overall performance, and just generally keep people happy in ways that are more than just financial, if that makes sense.
Yeah, thanks, Thomas, for sharing that. That experience with Aspire. Karen, did you want to wrap up your answer from a while ago about really
Yeah,
not.
I got too excited, I think.
I think that your connection couldn't handle all the
I know,
insight coming in.
exactly. Sorry, I lost actually, to be honest, right, I lost my train of thoughts because
I
I
think you were
was,
just
yes,
emphasizing sort of how HR can no longer be in the
yes,
backseat. Sort of,
that,
it's really.
that's right. So we host an HR roundtable, and we just hosted one today, right? And absolutely, I think HR is a key function, right? So we ourselves, right, have invested heavily into HR teams, and we talk about HR roles that have become multidimensional, right? So what does it mean? It's not anymore, right? A department where you go and complain that your payslip is wrong. It's mostly about having them as a business partner, right? So how can we be proactive as well, right, within the organization? And I think that would free up as well a lot of time and a lot of pressure on founders of companies, right? Which we've seen, right? So we talk to founders that actually have taken the leap, right, to actually create an HR department, and they've said themselves, right, why haven't I done it? Because I guess as a founder, you feel responsible, right? So, you put the company together, you've hired the 1 to the 150 person, so you feel responsible of the people. But at some point, you actually need to, again, not outsource the thing completely, but also then rely, right, on the right people to help you to manage the teams.
Yeah, and just to bring in Thomas's point from earlier, HR doesn't really have to work in silos, and there's a lot to learn from other departments that can be scaled across the organization. And for Ollie, any thoughts to add in terms of how to grow and manage an HR function, especially for our lean team?
Yeah, HR is an interesting one because during the pandemic, HR became front and center in terms of how to sort of manage through that, and health and well-being very much part of that. And we've seen it sort of as then companies came out of the pandemic and the rush to sort of make up for lost ground, HR got pushed back to sort of a support function and admin based. And I agree with both Thomas and Karen that HR really does need investment. It's very hard to build a sustainable business unless you get your people strategy on point and consistent. And that then leads, as Thomas said, to retention, engagement, and all these things. But you also got to find the right HR people. And I think it's fair to say that the quality of HR, and look, we partner with a lot of HR people, so I'm going to be a little bit careful how I phrase this, but is up and down compared to some more mature markets where HR's very often at the board, well, almost entirely, very much has a voice at boardroom level, and is a strategic part of any business. Michael Page is a public listed company. HR is a very prominent part of our business, and healthcare benefits and all the rest of it. A lot of that's done for us, to be honest with you, because it's a global policy and you follow it. Whether you like it or not, you follow it, but at least it's done. So employees aren't second guessing if it's what it's going to do. What we are seeing a little bit with companies, I think everyone's aware that HR is important. It's just, again, where does it fit on the agenda? We are seeing some companies now bringing people into senior HR positions who've not been in HR before, who've come from other parts of the business, who maybe have a better understanding of the commercial side of the business and a better empathy in terms of what the company's trying to do, and are more invested in the company. So it's not just a job. It's important because HR is very often the front line of when you are hiring. It's the first person somebody often meets is the HR representative, and good candidates will have good questions, and they need to be able to be answered if they're going to get a perception that company is a joined up company who are a good company and culture to join. If you don't have an HR person who's relatively commercial, that just becomes a screening process and is not a great first impression of a company in a competitive market. As Karen said, talent shortages. You can't afford to lose good talent early on just because somebody who's in front of them not necessarily providing the messages that you want them to do. We are seeing with SMEs that the more senior people, decision makers, are involved in interview processes earlier to give that first impression, and then some of the admin comes later on. So that's something to think about. But the challenge now is how do you find HR who are commercial? And that I will agree is there's a shortage of candidates in that. The other, in Indonesia, for example, you can't have a foreigner as head of HR. Labour laws, which they were updated, but this wasn't updated as part of the labour laws, the omnibus. So So then you are limited to people within the same pool who've often been in Indonesia business world for 15, 20 years, quite an old school way of managing an HR function. That's not going to get you where you want to get to. Or do you bring in somebody, 4 or 5 years experience, maybe he's not ready to take on that responsibility, but has a fresher mindset. But as we know, at that level, people tend to move on quite quickly into the next shiny toy and the next shiny thing. So HR is a big conundrum. I will happily admit that. Which is why we are seeing companies, as I said, starting to take some risks and taking people from outside HR and bring them in. Why? Because the people strategy is absolutely fundamental. So it's not a sideways move for somebody coming from supply chain or finance or wherever it might be. It's often seen, once it's explained, as quite a good career move for somebody. And we meet, and there are HR directors out there who've only had 1 or 2 years experience in HR and 15 years experience elsewhere. Consultancy firms as well. There are obviously HR consultancy firms. They tend to be a good source for this as well, for the smaller size businesses where the HR side of things isn't actually that complex. But again, back to my point earlier, a little bit of creative thinking happens. If you're just taking someone who's had 4 jobs in HR in the last 6 years, you probably know what you're going to get.
Yeah, really thinking about how to expand that pool, especially when you're limited by like labor laws and things like that. And really interesting point on how do you bring in HR that's commercial, right? So something to take away for our audience this afternoon. I wanted to quickly touch on financial management aspect as well of expanding into different markets. We've discussed at length about finding talent, setting up the admin side on managing that talent and all of that. I wanted to ask Thomas as well, like how does financial management and all these, say, different accounts that you're managing across different markets factor into this whole business expansion strategy for a regional company?
Yeah, I think on the financial side, it gets honestly very complicated very quickly once you're in multiple entities across multiple countries. As in addition to the local operations you're dealing with, you have all sorts of financial controls that you're trying to make standard across your different teams. You have to deal with tax issues, and so there are implications for the different intra-company transfers that you're doing as well. And our advice on this is that, first of all, there's really no magic bullet in the region. To some extent, you do have to bear the cost of that fragmentation to the extent that you need to. There are a few ways to simplify, right? So as Karen would probably tell you, for EOR providers, you can get like one single bill if that's what you're looking for as well. And so that can ease a lot of financial processing fees. If you're using something like the Aspire platform, where you have a unified ERP system like NetSuite, you can do reconciliation across the group of companies or throughout the region or throughout the world more easily as well. On the Aspire side, as you try to scale across different units or across different countries, you can take the same platform and issue corporate cards, issue budgets to different people, ensuring visibility as well as control throughout your scaling process. It tends to be easier than trying to replicate things through spreadsheets or through Google Docs throughout each different country. We've had several successful case studies like Glints, which recently used Aspire in their operations throughout the region, saving a lot of time on manual work and making sure that their teams are well trained on budgets, leading to greater fiscal responsibility, even while empowering them to spend more quickly. I could go on about this, but honestly, I think this overall space is still developing. I guess the overall gist of things is wherever it makes sense, do try to use a unified platform as possible and as local regulations allow.
Great, yeah, unified platform, and I think it's still early space. I think likely a very good business to be in to actually help businesses expand in different aspects in whatever way possible. At this point, I wanted to get into some of the questions that we have from the attendees and also the registrants for this event, and tackle the first one here that we have in the chat. So once again, for those who are here with us, feel free to start leaving questions in the chat as well, and we'll get to it. First up, we have, can the panel share tips or strategies to scale operations across multiple countries in Southeast Asia? I think we've covered a lot of that over this discussion. I think operations-wise, I guess, did anyone from our panel want to add when it comes to, because we just talked about landing into the market, I guess, with regards to growing that and trying to scale operations, especially for tech companies that did any of our panelists want to add to that? Thomas, from Aspire's experience, maybe, or
I think I can chime in.
Yeah.
I think something I've noticed, right, in terms of scaling operations, a lot of companies, so if you look at LinkedIn, right, so just look at the LinkedIn jobs advert, right? So one thing I've noticed recently, and not recently, maybe in the last year, is a lot of companies specify time zone, right, when they're hiring these days, right? So they don't even say, okay, you need to be based in, you must be based in, obviously, right, if it's a manufacturing job, I guess you have to be based somewhere, right? But a lot of the jobs today, they just specify time zone. And that was quite insightful for me, right? To actually notice that a lot of companies, right, go into, yeah, as long as you are in an Asian time zone, it's fine, right? So that again, right? So maybe it doesn't answer directly in terms of scaling the operation, but it goes towards the fact that the world is opening, right? So there is growth beyond borders, right? So that to relate to ourselves as well, we now have team members. If we were not a remote first company, right? If we were not able to, we have team members that actually would probably not be able to work for us, right? Because maybe they're not in a tier one city, maybe they're not in Jakarta, right? They are in other cities in Indonesia, other cities in Malaysia, that if they had to come to an office and work, we wouldn't have that talent pool available to us, right? So I think that would be one, again, going back to, if you can't find the talent in particular places, then open up. So look at the skill set, right? So first of all, right, focus on, okay, what are we trying to do? Are we trying to find someone who can, right, do the job regardless of where they are, right? Because again, technology, there are lots of tools today. So for us, we operate a lot on Slack, right? We have a lot of different plugins, as Thomas was saying, right? There's a lot of different APIs today that connects everything. That actually you have a mobile office, right? And that by default make you more appealing, right? So, and attractive.
Yeah, I did want to. Oh, Ali, go ahead.
So I was going to add to that because I've literally spent the last however long doing exactly that job in terms of how to scale up Southeast Asia. And talking to a company this morning who said, right, we want to hire across all these markets. Number one is prioritization, and this, as Thomas alluded to earlier, and the fragmentation of Southeast Asia. You often get this from companies coming from the Western world. Right, let's just go after it. It's the perception is different than the reality. The second thing is I would also look at focusing on retention. It's very hard to scale if your attrition rate is 40-50% because you spend your whole life just rotating. So areas like training and development, career progression paths, which Thomas again alluded to earlier, putting those in place early in these countries, starting small, getting them right, get the blueprint right. Word of mouth then also does an awful lot of the marketing for you in terms of your employee presence. But if people are leaving constantly, it's very, very hard to build a competitive edge in terms of, right, this is why you should join us, because you can lose track of that messaging very quickly or lose control of that messaging very quickly. So I'd focus on the retention bit. You'll find people. You just don't need to find all of them in the first 6 months. And that's some of the mistakes made in some of the companies who got caught up in the market conditions being very, very positive, scaled in the bubble, but have now found that's not a sustainable model at all. So I'd focus on retention. If you have the strong leadership in this part of the world, people follow the leader probably more than they follow the brand.
Yeah, I actually wanted to expand that point a little bit more with regards to retention and bringing that back into how that attracts even more talent and sort of creates this kind of like flywheel for the organization or for the brand. Maybe Thomas, you can speak to Aspire's own experience setting that flywheel up of by giving a great experience for employees, then that would eventually attract more people, better people, right, into the organization.
I mean, honestly, I'm hesitant to talk too much about our practices because one, I don't like to brag, and then two, I don't know how representative it necessarily is. But I will say that in my experience, anytime we're interviewing a candidate, I have found that people have talked long before they've gotten to me as a hiring manager. They might have talked to former employees at Aspire. They might have talked to existing current employees at Aspire. They definitely talked to their friends and their family who might know or are familiar with the company as well, right? And I have also found in my own experience that name recognition and brand recognition, for example, we were featured as a LinkedIn top startup, whatever that means, this year. And somehow candidates care about this kind of thing. So I will say that the branding efforts as well as the word of mouth actually do make a significant difference, especially when we're trying to keep a high hiring bar and trying to get the best talent.
Yeah, definitely great point that we brought up in this discussion about brand and making sure that's communicated across. We have the second question, which I think we've also covered, but just in case anyone else wanted to add, what are the most promising industries and countries for international expansion in C? Maybe I wanted to flip this question a little bit and ask, like, are there any understated kind of like industries or markets that maybe people aren't, really paying that much attention to, or that's pretty underrated in terms of Southeast Asia expansion that you guys think should deserves more interest or more attention?
I mean, I can take that first, since we are in some ways serving companies throughout the various countries of Southeast Asia. I think to some extent the spotlight, at least in the startup world, has generally been first on Singapore as a regional hub, and then secondly on Indonesia. As Ali mentioned earlier, I think some of that narrative, I would say across the board, has taken a hit. Right, a lot of unicorns did not turn out to be able to sustain their valuation and sustain their growth in an effective way. And I think that honestly does have something to do with the fundamental economics of the businesses here. A lot of the businesses we're going for very fast growth with relatively low margins. In order for that to happen, in order for that to sustain, one, you do eventually need to be able to charge more, and two, you need a lot of macro tailwinds to sustain your growth as well. So from that lens, if we kind of look past the hype, I do think that there are, from a consumer market standpoint, there are a couple of under or overlooked countries or markets in the region. I would call out specifically the Philippines as well as Vietnam. Both are very fast growth economies. Both kind of fly under the radar, difficult in their own ways, but have a lot of potential. From a B2B side, ultimately what powers the region is trade. And then financial services. Financial services, Singapore is going to be the hub. I think that's going to continue to be the case. But with trade, I think we do see increasingly more multifaceted trade. It's not just about exporting commodities at this point. And again, calling out Vietnam, which I'm actually fairly bullish on. We do see Vietnam and Vietnamese companies participating increasingly in global supply chains in a way that they weren't before. And so I do expect a lot more to come from that country in the future.
Yeah, so definitely more complex B2B trade and Vietnam as well. Ollie, I saw you unmuted yourself. Did you want to add?
Oh, I did. Apologies. I completely agree with. I spent most of the last hour agreeing with Thomas, but the Philippines I think is compelling. It's English speaking. It's kind of been pushed to the back of the agenda for a lot of companies in terms of expansion in Southeast Asia, but it has a large demographic, has also a very strong BPO sector, which has a lot of talent in it who are used to working for multinational companies. So that we're seeing fast. We launched the Philippines 2 years ago, and it's been our fastest growing country globally. And that is in a recovery time where a lot of other parts of the world have grown very quickly too. Philippines is the number one out of our 36 countries. So that's pretty compelling in itself. The other one I'd keep an eye on is Indonesia. And again, Thomas, and I was talking about the unicorn dynamics. The last 4 months, the results we've seen in Indonesia have really started to pick up. It had a pretty poor Q4, Q1 because of the tech winter and all that came with that. Confidence is coming back, and the demographics sell themselves with Indonesia. So elections, yes, I've mentioned that before, but that usually creates opportunity. And we saw this in the Philippines with the election. Marcos coming in to the Western world, that was maybe a strange kind of thing. But in the Philippines itself, he's already done more international trips than Duterte did in 8 years in the first 6 months. So elections, we anticipate Jakarta won't be too dissimilar to that in terms of going out there. We're ready for business. We want to pivot a little bit away from the unicorns, and that will create opportunities across different sectors as well. Vietnam, we continually say Vietnam is the one to keep an eye on, and the feedback we continually get, it's not as easy as it sounds with Vietnam, and some of the corruption and other things which are maybe some sensitive subjects. We still get examples of that quite a lot coming back to us, saying it's, getting a JV partner there is not as easy as we thought it would be, and hence companies then pivoting to Indonesia, Philippines, and then being pleasantly surprised, I think, by the fact that actually, consumer-wise, this is a much bigger market potentially. So Vietnam has its place, don't get me wrong. Thailand has been our best performing country in the last 12 months, which sometimes falls off the radar as well. A lot of that is manufacturing, automotive, and some of the sort of traditional areas, but some of that is in the digital space as well. So I'd keep an eye on Thailand as well in the next sort of 12, 18 months as a potential opportunity to scale up.
Yeah, interesting point on Thailand. Wasn't expecting that. But yeah, Thailand, Philippines, Vietnam, lots of really understated opportunities. To wrap up this conversation, I think I would be remiss not to drop, maybe it's a kind of worms, but to drop the whole AI topic on you guys and get some thoughts on how you're seeing that impacting this whole influx of talent, the types of talent people are hiring for, and how leaders like the ones we have in our audience this afternoon are looking at expansion. So maybe Karen, you can kick things off on how you're seeing sort of AI, specifically generative AI, kind of affecting sort of the usage of HR functions and different HR tools as well.
Sure. Actually, we hosted a discussion with LinkedIn in Hong Kong around a month ago, and actually, there's a lot of data, right, that actually LinkedIn itself has collated in terms of the usage of AI, right, across the hiring and also in terms of application, right. But maybe just as a personal. So I recall when, of course, ChatGPT came along, I did notice within my own team, right, that some of them were using it, right? But sometimes using it of course, in a good way, because these are all, things that we should use to shortcut or to get it, to make our lives easier. But as well is, how do you use it? I would say, right? So because sometimes you read a CV and you're like, oh yeah, that's really well written and nice. Then you meet the person, then it's different, right? So I guess it's the usage of AI, right? Like as in the usage of everything. But absolutely, right? So it is here to stay, same as we always say, right? Hybrid work, we need to embrace. And that has been one of the, I guess, the innovation, right? That has been adopted the fastest, right? If I may say, in the last few years.
Yep. Thanks, Karen. Thomas, any brief thoughts on AI and how that's impacted kind of expansion, especially for Aspire as well?
I think at a basic level, AI has enabled a lot of elimination of manual work. So a big part of finance and accounting, particularly on the bookkeeping side, is making sure you have all the receipts in place, right? And so if you're able to do optical recognition of receipts and what they contain, which is a technology that we've used, that actually eliminates a lot of the manual work that is incredibly boring for finance teams. I think we increasingly do look to see what we can do more with AI. The generative AI piece, I have found to be a little less relevant directly in the finance world. You're just not meant to be creating things. I mean, creative accounting is actually pejorative in finance after all. But I think as we get better analytics and as we get better inferences probabilistically from AI in terms of matching different transactions, different tasks or projects and things like that, I think we will see a continued increasing of the efficiency that finance teams enjoy through their tooling.
And Ollie, any final thoughts there?
Yeah, look, we've certainly seen an improvement in the standard of CVs, but they're coming straight from ChatGPT. So when you interview that person, just double check that they've actually written their own CV. But look, for us, very brief, from a hiring perspective, we see AI impacting the more low-level hiring, so the junior roles, which can be done through AI. We do not see it necessarily having much of an impact at the more mid-senior management level, where there still needs to be a human interaction to make the right decision. So it's there, but it's not really impacting too much at this stage.
All right. On that note, thank you so much, Karen, Thomas, and Ollie, for this afternoon's discussion. A lot of topics covered, and thank you to our attendees for sticking with us through the hour. We have a post-event survey link flashed on the screen, which you guys can scan by QR and share with us any thoughts, any more questions, as well as feedback on the event. This event actually came about thanks to a playbook that we did a couple months ago on cross-border expansion, hiring, all of that. And for the lucky folks who have registered and are here with us this afternoon, you guys will be getting a copy, especially if you don't have one. We'll see how we can also share our latest playbook, CFO playbook, with Aspire as well, along with the hiring, cross-border hiring one. And if you wanted to review this discussion, we'll be putting it up on the On Call with Insignia podcast. And if you guys are tuning in at this moment and listening to this recording, thanks for doing that. And hopefully you guys are able to take away a lot of things for your business as well. So on that note, thank you so much, everybody, for tuning in.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you.